Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Bowie Snodgrass. I'm the rector of Christ Church in Short Hills, New Jersey, and I'm also the co-chair of the Episcopal Parish Network planning team. And we're happy to welcome you to this workshop about Margo Guernsey's film, The Philadelphia 11, and just a few procedural items before we begin. First, the session is being recorded, and you'll receive an email with a link to the recording and additional materials once they post to the website's workshop library. We try to get this out within 24 to 48 hours. Also, the Q&A function is disabled, but please enter your questions into the chat and we'll answer them after a conversation between the two of us. And the transcript of the chat will be available alongside the recording. The title and the theme of this webinar is Looking Back to Move Forward. And I first became aware of the Philadelphia 11 documentary in 2019 when I made a $100 donation to a Kickstarter that a lot of people I knew were posting online. And I got this fabulous tote bag, which I still use regularly. And I've been on the mailing list ever since. When I joined the planning team Episcopal Parish Network in 2022, I planned a stewardship session called Pledging the Original Crowdfunding, and I included Margo to talk about her experience of using Kickstarter and crowdfunding, which is how I first got to know her, both online and then in person in Atlanta. And then Christ Church in Short Hills gave maybe that was that in Jacksonville?
I wasn't going to correct you, but
it was in Jacksonville. And Christ Church in Short Hills gave an outreach grant to produce the trailer to the film. And we worked with Joe Swimmer to have it premiere at the Episcopal Parish Network conference in 2023. And we're going to briefly see the trailer now.
My mother said to me that I had told her when I was a little girl that I wanted to be a priest. She and my dad both said, well, that's wonderful, honey, but that's just not what girls do.
A heated debate has been going on in the Episcopal Church on whether women can serve as priests.
There's no reason why a woman couldn't be president or a judge or a number of other things. But the one thing that she absolutely cannot be is a mom.
I get so tired of being decided about behind my back.
The oppressor cannot be the instrument of the liberation of the oppressed. And yet in this structure, women do not have the power to effect their own liberation.
Conservative and liberal and progressive and radical and right on the edge. We were not the same by any means.
The phones were ringing off the hook. One woman said, "Are you people going to ordain women there today?" And I said, "Yes, we are." And she said, "You're going to split this church right in half." I said, "The church is already split in half. That's why we're doing it."
Proceedings here enacted are unlawful and systematical.
It is simply a role which a woman cannot fill.
God shall be called Father, and so shall his priests.
There were all these lights, NBC, ABC, CBS, were out there with their big cameras, and it was like, my goodness.
It was so clear that we were being called to that day, and we were willing to stand, and we would not be denied this.
The Episcopal House of Bishops today ruled invalid last month's ordination of 11 women as priests.
We kept going to parishes that want us there as priests. Of course, we're called a bunch of man-hating dykes, bitches and shrews and all of this stuff. At some point, what was going to happen to us, of course, was a big question.
The 11 little priestesses all in a row, like the little Indians. I'd be delighted if they'd go away.
I suggest to you that we cannot wait to settle questions of the freedom of all of humanity. Women are either free in our society or they are not.
There's a saying, you need to speak the truth even if your voice shakes. And that's what I did.
Well, this is a wonderful film and documentary. Margo and I did a webinar together almost exactly 2 years ago in 2023, right before the film was released. And we're doing this webinar today because this amazing documentary about the irregular ordination of 11 women as Episcopal priests in 1974 is showing on PBS channels around the country, and it is streaming free on pbs.org through June 2nd. So watch it, tell your friends and your congregations. And thank you for being with us today. Margo, one of the newsletters that you sent out recently to the Kickstarter email list said that you started working on this idea 10 years ago, back in 2015, back when Obama was president. What were your goals and your hopes at that time, and what attracted you to this story?
Yes, thank you, Bowie. It's such a pleasure to do this again with you 2 years later when the film has had a journey. I suspect a number of people who are here with us today have seen it with their congregations and have shared already in some deep conversations about it. So welcome, everyone. In 2015, my first conversation with Reverend Carter Hayward was in 2012, but we started filming in 2015, which is why I often talk about 2015. And at that time, I had a deep feeling, even one could call it a call about this story, because let me back up for a minute. When I first talked with Carter in 2012, I did not know, and it's embarrassing to say that I did not know her story. I actually reached out to her about the Reverend Dr. Pauline Murray, and I knew that they had been friends, or they had at least done some work together. And so she had to educate me in this phone call that I had with her. And in that moment, as she's telling me this story, I just had this wave of, oh my goodness, why do I not know this story? And not so much why do I personally not know it, although as a student of history and of American history and of the civil rights movement, it felt like something that had been left out immediately to me. But also, why do we not know this story? Why is this story something that's not part of the history that we learn of what happened in the United States in the 1970s? I mean, it was national news for years. It was on the 6 p.m. CBS, ABC, and for years. So why then, if that might be a standard, we could debate whether that's a legit standard, but if that is a fact, why is it not part of our history? And so in 2015, Nikki Bramley, who is a co-producer on the project and my filmmaker colleague on this film, she and I went down and we were able to gather with the Reverend Allison Cheek and Carter Hayward and a few others, and that was when we started filming. And at that time, not only were none of us able to imagine the world as it is today, but the stories that Carter and Allison were telling us were so different from today. So they were telling us about how when they talked about their ordination, still in 2015, there would be women in the room who would say, "Why are you angry?" And by the way, neither one of them is an angry person. They're very joyful people. And why do you feel you need to talk about this? And what's your problem? It was just a very different time when the understanding of what it would mean for us all to be liberated and live out our own calls, whatever they might be, whether they're connected with God or not, there was just such a different moment. But I would say that the other thing that very much resonated with me from the minute I had that conversation with Carter was that this is a story for everyone. It is a story for anyone who's ever been denied their call, and I use that word broadly. So for anyone who's been told you cannot be who you want to be, who you feel you are called to be, your purpose on this earth, because not of your skills, ability, but because of who you are, whether that be who you are in terms of your gender or something else. And so for me, that was the reason for telling this story. In addition to that, I think that sometimes stories of faith get siloed, and I wanted it to be more of a mainstream story. But yeah, so it was a very, very different world.
And Margo, can you just give us kind of a brief telling of your journey over the past decade of making this film?
Yes, I've been asked a lot of questions, but I haven't been asked this one, so I'm gonna sit for a minute and make sure that I make it. I think brief would be a good way to describe how to do this. So you and I met, Bowie, or met via email perhaps, in 2019 when we ran the Kickstarter campaign. So if we roll back to 2015, we had a few local arts grants: Mass Humanities, the Left Foundation's a local grant foundation that supports filmmakers in New England. They've given us some smaller grants, and Nikki and I were using them to pay for travel and to pay an archival producer, and she and I were putting in our own time on the weekends with the goal of getting enough footage to put together a sample that would then, in theory, convince some of the more standard industry funders to come in and finish funding the film. This is a dream a lot of independent filmmakers have, and it is a route that used to be much more common than it is now. And so we did that, and we got to the point where it was clear that that these women were getting older, and we really needed to keep filming, and there weren't any grants coming in. So we ran the Kickstarter campaign, and many of you, I'm sure, on this call donated, for which we are very grateful. And what happened with that Kickstarter campaign, aside from what you all can witness by just looking it up online and seeing how many people donated and what kinds of messages we were putting out about what our plans were, the other thing that happened is that we started to connect with people all over the country who care about this story. So in addition to what came in online, we were getting snail mail, and letters in the mail with donations of $10, $15, maybe $60, and long letters about how important the story was, photos, newspaper clippings, emails offline with all these same things I'm saying, but not as part of the campaign. And that kept going after 2019. And so when we hit the next financial roadblock, we said, and I'm a union organizer by training. So my first 5 years out of college, I was a union organizer. And so I kind of came up with a lot of community and committee building skills and listening skills. And I said, Nikki was also really adamant about the piece. Like, we can't walk away from this. We have such a big network of people who are not believe in us, have shared with us, have collaborated. Like, we can't walk away. And that's when I said, okay, we need a different strategy, because there's just right now, even with all of these horrible cuts to the NEH and the NEA, which are drastic, but we also have to remember that even before then, there really has never been enough public funding to support independent storytelling of any kind in any art medium. And it was just always very hard to break through and get those grants. And so that's when we put together the Film Funders Circle, which many of you have heard about. They're the names of the women who participated on the website, and we've talked about it a lot. And that group started meeting every 3 weeks, not even monthly, every 2 to 3 weeks. And we planned many events, which many of you have been a part of. And that's really how the rest of the film was funded. So it really was a movement to tell the story that got us across the finish line.
Margo, there are a couple of requests for you to turn up your volume.
Oh.
I don't know how you can do that, but while you're looking into that, we do have another clip I want to show about calling. And this is Carter Hayward talking about her call to ministry.
From the time that I was 2 on, I began to sort of experience some kind of connection between the God that we're hearing about in church all the time and my animal friends. There's never been a time in my life that I can recall that I wasn't pondering how we're connected to this God. I have a particular understanding of the priesthood that has only grown deeper over the years. God calls certain of us to help others see reality through the eyes of God. And this is always about justice, and always about compassion, and always about kindness and mercy. My mother said to me that I had told her when I was a little girl that I wanted to be a priest. She said she and my dad both said, well, that's wonderful, honey, but that's just not what girls do.
So Friends, if you can't hear Margo, you might just have to turn your volume up louder and she will try to speak a little closer to the computer. Margo, I would love to hear what you've learned from getting to know these women, the members of the Philadelphia 11, and what was it like for them to look back on this event from the vantage point of time, 40, 50 years later?
One of the greatest gifts of this project has been getting to know them so well. Their gift of, and we're going to talk about this later, I think, their gift of showing and teaching what it really means to be in solidarity. That is something that is not only part of the story in the film, but it's also a part of how they walk in the world. And it really has been a gift to participate in that with them, in getting to know them better. When we were watching the trailer, which has now been out in the world for a couple of years, and I'm sure you had all maybe seen it before we even showed it here, it strikes me that we ended the trailer 2 years ago with Meryl saying, sometimes you have to speak the truth, even if your voice shakes, and that's what I did. And, I think today that means so much. It means so much more than it even meant 2 years ago. I mean, a lot of us have to now, all of us, anytime we speak, our voices might shake, anytime we speak truth. And it's still important to do that. And so I think that as they've looked back, I also look back and reflect on the different times that we're in and the times that continue to evolve. I will say they have been pleasantly surprised at the love that's been poured on them as they've been telling their story. And I can just say that it's another example of when your voice shakes, keep talking, because if you're speaking the truth, that you'll get the love. I don't know any other way to say it, but sometimes it can feel scary to say the truth, but the truth is powerful.
Yeah. I think that you had said that you grew up in the UCC church. But you actually just had very fortuitous timing with this story because July 29th, 2024 was the 50th anniversary of the Philadelphia 11 and was a big deal throughout the Episcopal Church. And it was just such a gift to all of us that this documentary was available at that time. And we do have a clip from the day of the ordination service that we're going to show.
It is our previous understanding that there are persons present who would like to make statements concerning individuals who are to be ordained.
The proceedings here enacted are unlawful and schismatical, constituting a grave injury to the peace of Christ's church.
We do not gain 11 priests today. We lose 4 bishops. You may break the laws, sirs. Our Savior broke many laws, but you break today a law he did not break. That law is this: God shall be called Father, and so shall his priests.
How can a religious organization condemn sexism in the world and at the same time condone legislative action which discriminates against women in the church? We have come here today to secure the right of full participation. If it must be done, 'tis better that it should be done now.
The deeply profound moment for me was when the bishop read the 3 pages in the prayer book in the most melodious voice with eye contact all the time. And that, to me, felt like a movement of the Spirit moving into me.
receive the Holy Ghost for the office and work of a priest in the Church of God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
It felt like the church was rising to the occasion. The people of God were being the people of God.
Amen.
So powerful. What has been the response that you've heard from people who have seen the film since it was released? And I'm especially interested in what you've heard from young women today, people who are Gen Z and millennial, and also from non-Episcopalians, particularly women in or people in denominations that don't ordain women.
That is a really moving part of the film. And, every time I watch it, I'm moved. And every time I hear people talk about how one could feel the spirit in that church that day, I am moved, and I'm grateful for that footage that we found. And I just, for the first time, it's embarrassing to say this is for the first time, but I think that that's Barbara Harris next to one of the ordaining priests. We can't go back now, but I think that might be her standing there, which is nice, which is a nice connection. Your question is about how it's been landing with people. Especially young people, we've gotten many different forms of feedback about how they cannot believe. I would say most of the young people we've heard directly from are their mothers are priests, or they are somehow directly connected to the church. And I don't want to repeat the kind of language they use, because my daughter will be embarrassed because I can't speak teen, and so I'm not going to try. But it's like, dang, I had no idea how badass my mom was, or I had no idea what they'd been through. I mean, it's almost, some of the messages have been forwarded, some text messages between youth and their parents, and not to be shared publicly, obviously, because it's a private conversation, but it's almost watching them react as if they just watched a TikTok video, right? So it feels that contemporary to them. They can connect the struggle with today, with their person, whatever their personal struggles might be today. So that's been actually quite powerful. I suspect it's also opened up conversations where a mom might be, I don't know, Bowie, if this happened in your family, but where children really don't know anything about what their parents do, aside from maybe hearing you preach in church. And it kind of has opened up more conversations, I think, in some families about that. Your question, I think, was also about wider audience outside of young folks. And the PBS opportunity has really opened up, which was always the goal. So if you were part of Kickstarter, you heard us talk about the goal is to reach a wide audience. And that is why we stayed so focused on getting it to PBS. And it has served the goal of reaching a wider audience. And we hear anecdotes all the time. Oh, I found this movie. I just watched it. It's so good. It's called The Philadelphia 11. I think you'd love it. And then my friend will say, well, actually, I know the filmmaker. Right? Like people, or one of my kids' friends' parents, who I never talk about my work with, say, text me, wait a minute, I'm watching TV and your film's on. Right? So it really is working to get it out farther. I wish that there were some kind of a logarithm that would really help it pop up. So we do need to keep spreading the word, because people will stumble on it when it broadcasts, but to find it online streaming, you have to either be searching for documentaries or you have to know to search for the title. So we'll share in the chat more about how to do that. But it really has reached a wider audience.
It's reaching a wide audience at a moment when diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are under fire. And there's a clip about the worship service taking place at the Church of the Advocate in Philadelphia, which is a historically Black church. So we're going to watch that and then talk a little more.
We talked some about how white we all were. At that point, the structure of the Episcopal Church was so largely white, and there were no women of color, none at all, who had been ordained deacons who were ready to be ordained to the priesthood. So for us to be invited to to be ordained to the Church of the Advocate was really quite a powerful statement of solidarity of black people and white people together against sexism.
So this film, the first time that I watched the whole thing, one of the things that really surprised me is that it takes place over more than a decade. It begins a number of years before the Philadelphia 11 happened, kind of what was the lead up to that moment of civil or ecclesiastical disobedience. And then it continues all the way through the Washington Four, and then the ordination of Polly Murray, the first African-American woman priest, and then all the way to the consecration of Barbara Harris. When you and I spoke before this, you said that one of the main lessons that you've taken from this history and from this movement was the importance of solidarity. And can you just say a few more words about that?
Yeah, I think that solidarity and standing in solidarity is such an integral part of this movement, and quite frankly, I think it's an integral part of why it succeeded. You know, it goes back, you know, having a Black church be the only church in the entire Episcopal Church, and this is true. We didn't put these notes in the film, but it's in the archives, on all kinds of scratches of paper where people were taking minutes in meetings. It was the only church that was willing to host these ordinations. They were turned down by many, many, many others. And so the fact that it was a Black urban church that hosted nonetheless the Black Panthers around the same time, I think shows at a time when it was not a given that the civil rights movement would address women's issues, nor was it a given that the white-led women's movement would address issues about Black and brown people. And so it's significant that that happened and that it was such a close collaboration. It has to do with deeper roots. I think that Sue Hyatt had very close ties with the rector, with Reverend Washington, as did DeWitt, Bishop DeWitt. But that choice, I think, is significant. And you know, on the issue of DEI, I think the fact that we call it DEI is not a service, is not a good message, it is a disservice to messaging, right? DEI is really about making sure everybody's included, that every single person has the same opportunities to live out who they want to be fully, and that race is not a factor in that. But the only way you get to that is by seeing race to make sure that the systems that disenfranchise can be eliminated. But talking about it, DEI sounds like code for something, right? It's not code, it's just about equality. And so solidarity is also about equality. We all stand together regardless of where we come from so that we can all achieve a common goal. And a couple other places that is integral in the story is, it's not as clear, I don't know if it comes quite as clearly across in the film, but as with any social movement, they had a lot of different opinions about how to move forward. We have the clip in there about the Reverend Polly Murray, who wasn't sure they should be ordained again, you know, without permission in Philadelphia. She went to the service, she supported it, but she had a lot of hesitations about that. She is meant to be representative in the film of the diversity of opinion, but there were a lot of disagreements about how to move forward. They disagreed respectfully and they continued forward. And when I say respectfully, there was a lot of activities going on. Nobody tried to undercut anyone else. Each group did their own thing that they felt called to do, but they did so in a way where there was where everyone was stood in solidarity because the common goal at the end was the same. And then one other place I'll lift up for those of you who've seen the film, are you going to show the clip about Sue Hyatt saying?
I am, yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to talk about it then.
And, you know, I do have to say that one of the great things, especially with your union organizer background about the film, is it really shows how this movement was built, and then going all the way to Barbara Harris's consecration is a really powerful way to end it. And we do have another clip related to sex and gender.
By that time, I had studied enough theology to realize that if you're going to really talk about gender issues and sexual issues, you're going to wind up talking about the same things. And that people could try to keep them separate, and some did. Well, this is about women's ordination, not about gay stuff. And in my heart of hearts, I knew that's not true. It's about all of it.
Do you consider homosexuality a disease?
No, I don't. It's a sin. It's very plain in many, many scriptures, in the Old Testament as well as the New, that God calls it an abomination. And if they continue in that sin and do not repent of it, you see, any sinner has an opportunity to repent of sin rather than flaunt it and want to change legislation to condone that kind of sin. My stand is based on the Word of God. And if God is not the standard of morality, then who is?
There were several of us that were, in fact, gay or lesbian. Of course, we're called a bunch of man-hating dykes. Bitches and shrews and all of this stuff, but Sue Hyatt was the first one of us, I believe, to ever say, when called a lesbian in public, "Thank you." She never felt a need to say, I'm actually straight, but I really support my sisters. Just thank you.
So much has changed in the past 50 years, and yet the work for full sex and gender inclusion continues. Do you want to say a word, Margo, about that aspect of the film?
I think that what Sue Hyatt said is actually quite powerful. So words have power, and our reactions to things have power. And she could have said very easily, "Oh, I'm straight." It just as a way of maybe setting the record straight, saying, and she chose not to. Instead, she chose to stand in full solidarity with her sisters. And I think that is something we could spend the rest of the webinar talking about. What does that look like today, right? When challenged, on, let's say, immigration status. Well, I was born in the United States, right? That would be to say, okay, or to just stand in solidarity and say, we're all humans and we're all here together and everyone needs to be treated equally. And we all, right? There's so many examples, unfortunately, as we move forward on how powerful it can be to truly stand in solidarity with our, brothers and sisters.
Yeah. The promo material that was put together for this webinar put down the categories as art/changing church, which made me think about the particular power of documentary film to combine history and education with art, where you're showing images to tell a story. And as a documentary filmmaker, how would you describe the impact of this documentary in particular, and documentary filmmaking, whether for a short video or for a website or for a full-length documentary? What's the particular power of teaching and showing through this medium in this time and going forward when video is more and more prevalent?
Every art form has its purpose, and writing has its purpose. The written word enables us to go into deep depth with detail. Film enables us to go deep with emotions. It is a medium that lends itself to bringing us in emotionally. And so as much detail as in the film, you will also note that there is a lot of detail that's left out, that you really need to go back to history books and other writings to find out. More background on each of the 11, more background on the ordaining bishops, more details about what happened in the trials, more information about the different organizations. WON was Women's Ordination Now, and then there were a couple others, right? Those details don't fit into a 90-minute film. But the emotions of what happened, that is what we are able to capture. And so I think the power of documentary as a storytelling format is that it can bring you back to walk, if not completely understand what it might have been like then, to come closer to that, especially with finding the kind of footage we were able to find, of the service itself, as an example. I would also say that telling our stories is so incredibly important, and particularly in the fragmented media universe we not only live in, but future generations will also live in, where to say something that sounds a little cheesy, but if we don't tell our story, who will, right? If we don't tell our story, other people will tell it, and they will tell it incorrectly, right? The only way to ensure that our histories are recorded and documented is to make sure that we're telling them. And then to remind everybody that when you see something, to fact check it and to be diligent in your fact checking. And then when we're telling our own stories, we need to be diligent in sharing our sources, right? But storytelling is powerful, and we need to be telling our stories so that we can continue to pass them on to future generations.
Yeah. What's next?
I've been talking a lot about storytelling with a lot of people. You know, the fact that so many grants are getting cut from different organizations, I think those organizations, a story is being told about them that their work does not have value, right? So the need for them to tell their stories about the value of their work is urgent. And it's just a reminder that it is actually urgent that we're all talking about our own stories in our own communities, so that somebody else doesn't tell a different story that's not factual and that's not correct and that's not true to who we are. And so I am actually doing more work doing that kind of storytelling, whether it be short videos or whatever, you know, really aligned with whatever the group is I'm working with. But that's what's next for me. I think for this group, most importantly, what's next is that the film is streaming for free on PBS, and we really want as many people as possible to see it. It's a great time to tell a friend who's not part of the church to go watch it. For one, it's on PBS and it's free, and it really is a film that resonates, and you can tell your friends who might not be part of an organized religion or might not see themselves in that way that this is a film that's going to resonate. Like, that's not what it's about. Tell them it's not about church. It just happens to take place in a church. Go watch it. But I think we're in a moment where it's really important for everybody to understand that a white Christian nationalist view of Christianity and what it means to be Christian is not what it means to be Christian, right? And that is not Jesus taught us to stand with the marginalized, and that you know, it's important to continue to lift up our voices. And so the film hopefully can play a very small part in that. But some people have who aren't tech savvy might need the help. So I just want you to know that if you go to pbs.org, sometimes you're asked to choose your local station. If you go on there a lot, it won't trigger that. But if you're going for the first time, just click on the local station. Quite frankly, if you're given multiple options, it won't matter which one you choose. And then go to the little magnifying glass at the top that's a search box and type in the Philadelphia 11, and it should come right up. And then you can click on it and watch it. Our understanding is that it will be streaming through June 2nd. So you have a little less than a month to tell your friends to watch it.
Yeah. We did a screening at Christ Church in our parish hall, and we had like nice snacks, and we followed it with a conversation, but we promoted it with little postcards, and we ordered from the U.S. Treasury Polly Murray quarters, which you can order, and then we put them on the postcard so everybody could take home a Polly Murray quarter and come see the film. It really does spark a lot of conversation. So in addition to watching it at home and telling your friends, consider doing a screening. The 50th anniversary of the Washington 4 is coming up on September 8th, 2025, and that is also featured prominently in the film. So that could be another opportunity to show the film. We are open for Q&A, and actually, while questions are coming in, we do have one more clip, and since we have some extra time, I'd love to show it about solidarity that men had in this struggle. And there were a couple of men who allowed women to preside at the Eucharist before they were accepted into the church, and who actually went on trial and were defrocked. So, Laura, can you show that clip also of the men solidarity?
Why are you on trial?
Well, I'm on trial supposedly for being disobedient, for a very good cause, needless to say.
I think that the principal issue in this trial is the sexism of the Episcopal Church.
It was all around this issue of disobeying the godly admonition. Was the admonition really godly? Did it really come from God? Or did it come from a male ego?
It was hard to believe it was really happening. It's like having an inquisition here in 1975.
The trial of Father William Went began today in front of hundreds of spectators in the sanctuary of St. Columba's Episcopal Church. Went is accused of disobeying his bishop when he allowed Mrs. Allison Cheek to celebrate Holy Communion.
The irony is, if they had taken the women to trial, they would have had to struggle with whether or not we really had been ordained priests. That was a risk that was too great. So they brought the men to trial for having invited us.
Father William Went believes it is not an accident that he was disciplined instead of the women.
If they were to be brought to trial or disciplined in any manner, then they would be recognized and they would have to be dealt with as priests. And so far, as I say, they are in the minds of many non-entities.
We were done. We were done. My career was finished. But it's deeper than that. I should have said to the bishop, look, you marched in Selma. How dare you take the stance that you're taking? How dare you preach to this country, you know, the way you did and not to your own institution?
Also a really powerful part of the film and correlates to our moment today. Margo, how has this part of the film been received, or what have been your insights working on it, or pieces of wisdom for today?
The, you know, his comment at the end about how dare you not preach to the country and not do the same to your own institution are reminding me how important the work of changing institutions actually is and how hard it is, which is why this movement has taken decades. If you know, in the film, when you hear Pauline Murray talk about this, she says to Carter, and I think to Sue Hyatt, do what you need to do, but don't leave the church. And I think that's incredibly prophetic to think, okay, what she's saying here is, you know, we can all have a difference of opinion about strategy, but the most important thing here is that we stay for the long game. We're here till the church will fully recognize all of us, all of our baptismal vows, all of who we are, and as opposed to going off and doing their own thing that would not get much recognition, and maybe they live happily, but they have not actually followed their call if they did that. So I think those words are actually quite important and are really resonating for me now, also hearing Peter Beebe speak. A question that comes up a lot after folks watch the film is what happened to the Reverend Peter Beebe and the Reverend Bill Went. And the answer is that the Reverend Bill Went faced fewer challenges, I would say. The backlash was not quite as intense, and I think that had to do with his diocese, and I don't know the specifics, and he has passed away. Peter Beebe has been, I don't know the right word, shunned completely, you know, but to this day, blocked from the church. And he went back, he got a degree in social work, he lives in California, he's come to a number of events. And, you know, he's doing quite well himself, but he's not been allowed back in the church. It was a very intense experience for him.
And one of the Philadelphia 11 women also left the priesthood, kind of after going through all of this very intense process. She just...
Yeah, there are two of them, actually. One of them, the story's in the film. So the Reverend Merrill Bittner, it was too much. She was very much one of the prominent voices of the 11 in those couple years after they were ordained. She was in the headlines every day. She was very much telling her story. She was going from church to church telling her story, and it was too much. And she and her partner went and built a cabin in the woods, and that story's in the film. The other one of the 11 who left the church is the Reverend Marie Moorfield Fleischer, who was told she could not step on Episcopal Church property. And at the time she worked, I don't want to say it out loud because I'm going to get it wrong, but her job required that she step on Episcopal Church property. And so she left and she became a minister in the Methodist Church for many years. She eventually came back in the 80s and, reaffirmed her, and became came back to the Episcopal Church. But for many years, she was part of the Methodist Church for that.
Yeah. Mary Jeffers confirms, yes, it was Barbara who was an acolyte at that service, and she is in that clip. Roberta Torian says, in the Diocese of Pennsylvania, the Center for Courageous Women of Faith has been established to create a permanent center to commemorate the Philadelphia 11 event, as well as the ordination of Bishop Harris. It has nonprofit status, and they're looking for artifacts and allies, so you can take a look at that. Also, Catherine Hunt said that the DECW board in Western Oregon made a recording of an interview with Ala Renee Bozarth in 2006. Are there any other questions from folks who
We're
are
waiting for other questions. I will share that actually by coincidence next week, we, as part of the process, there's always a lot of footage that doesn't make it in the film. And one of the things that didn't make it in the film, even though the story of the Washington Four is in the film, the interviews with the women who were ordained in Washington, D.C. on September 8th in 1975 did not make it into the film. And we have those. And there was one that we never got a chance to do. And we're doing it next week. So we will be recording an interview with Betty Powell next week, so that we have a complete set of interviews with everybody, so that it will be able to go into the archives with the other interviews.
Oh, wow, amazing.
And I would also say that the work of the Center for Courageous Women of Faith in Philadelphia is something that we are very much would love to. We are going to be supporting it. We are supporting it. Next time you see a newsletter from us, it will have some links to for other folks who want to support it. But storytelling through film is one way to tell stories. Physical museums and spaces are other ways that are very powerful and create a permanent landmark where folks can come and learn more, learn in different ways. And so I think it's a really important project. Thank you, Roberta, for being here.
Well, just one little, here's a question from Lane Finnegan. Whether in churches, institutions, or personal reflection, what do you hope audiences will do after they watch? And what are some practical ways communities can honor the legacy of these women while pushing for broader inclusion today?
I'm going to come back to solidarity. I think that, we're in a very, I think we're finding our footing in terms of being in solidarity to push for broader inclusion today. And I think that we still have a lot to learn or relearn about how to do that and how to do that well. There are so many groups that are being marginalized and at this time. And so I think learning the lessons of solidarity, learning to speak the truth, even if your voice shakes, and to carry on, to carry that on in every way that you show up at every part of the day. I also think that what do I want? I want us to have some of these hard conversations after we watch the film. What is it that where have we stumbled since the 1974 or 1976 or 1988 when Barbara Harris was consecrated? Where have we stumbled, and where can we pick back up and relearn what it means to stand together in solidarity, and how we can all, move forward together.
And, I would say that I think in this moment when we're figuring out how to move forward, there is a value in looking back. I was just talking to someone today about how to stand up for trans rights, and we were talking about the struggle for sexual inclusion in the 70s and 80s. And there have been movements before. There have been a lot of movements in the American history. And I think looking back, one little and you make new connections. One connection for me is that when I was in high school, I lived in a town called Olean, New York, in Western New York. And there was a town about 20 minutes away called Farmersville. And Farmersville voted to bring in the largest dump in the Northeast. And it turned out that it was going to be over the largest aquifer in the Northeast. And so there was this huge fight, and my church and my family were all very involved. And at some point we did get, there was a hearing with the EPA, And as a high school student, I read a poem from this collection of prayers called Earth Prayers. And it was so powerful to me that when I applied for college early decision, this was before the Common Application, there was a page called Your Space, and you could do whatever you wanted. I made a collage and I included that that poem or that prayer, and it's just been very meaningful to me over the years. And it's by Ala Renee Bozarth. And because it was in a collection, I just had never realized that A, she was a priest, and B, she was part of the Philadelphia 11. And I remember watching the documentary and thinking, oh my God, this poem, this prayer that was so formative for me, in this protest that I was part of as a teenager. She was part of the Philadelphia 11. And so you do make new connections. I do think that, as you said, the film and documentary filmmaking does have, it does reach our hearts. And it's a great way that people can come together. We recently at our church also did a showing of Join or Die, talking about the importance of being part of groups. And we had a potluck meal and we had a discussion. And for churches, it's showing a movie is a very easy program. You set up the screen and the projector, get people together and have discussion. I have my mug here from General Theological Seminary, 50 years of women at General. This is a moment, 50 years is a long time, and yet in human history, it's not very long at all. And there are many of us who have been born since this happened, but also many people, as you said, who really have no sense of this history and this fight from their mothers and their grandmothers. And we can learn, and their fathers and grandfathers, and we can learn a lot from them moving forward. Margo, I want to give you the last word, and then I'll do the kind of official wrap up.
All right. Before I do that, there is one question in the text for you. I'm interested in how these stories have impacted your ministry. Do you want to just take a couple minutes to answer that, and then I'll say a last word?
Well, Sean, I was sharing that a little bit in my story about the poem, kind of in response to your question. And a hello to Jeff. The Episcopal world is it's a big world and a small church, and that's really, I think, a gift of this church.
I mean, my wrap up would be similar to what has been shared about coming together in community and watching the film, making sure that you tell your friends. I've gotten some requests for DVDs, and we don't have DVDs available now, but we're going to do one run of DVDs in the fall. So we'll send out a newsletter about it, and we'll post about it on social media. It will be the kind of thing where you have to order it on the order form, because we're going to make basically, you can do 100 or 150 or 200. We're going to base our order based on how many requests come in. So look for that if you're interested in the DVD, in having a DVD to own for your own. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. It's always the highlight of my day if I get to gather with Episcopalians to talk about this story. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, so the documentary is available on pbs.org for free, widespread through June 2nd. This is a moment that has been a long time in the coming, and the fullness of time for this documentary. And this workshop is being recorded. It'll be available in the next couple of days. You'll receive a link to the recording and other materials when they post to the workshop, episcopalparishes.org, digital workshop library. There was another workshop, a webinar that Margo and I did was that?
Nancy.
With Nancy.
Nancy Wittig, yeah.
2 years ago. Thank you, Margo, for sharing your time and educating us about this documentary. Thanks to our partners, to Time Travel Productions, which is Margo's company, Doxology Films, which is distributing the Philadelphia 11 and other films that are about faith, and the Episcopal Church for participating in this big effort. There are other digital workshops on liturgy, technology, utilizing volunteers, communication, and giving coming up in the next few months. All of the webinars are free and accessible to anybody who wants to attend them, and then they're all posted on the YouTube channel. We hope you can join us. There are The workshops that are coming up are listed on episcopalparishes.org, upcoming/workshops. So God bless you all. Thank you for taking an hour out of your day to be with us. And I hope that you will watch the documentary again, tell your friends, or watch it for the first time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
God bless.